Kingpin thanks you for your loyalty.
I wouldn't have it any other way. Maya, enough games! If you want a war, you'll have it.
Well, I think one of the things that was so interesting to me coming into the project is the fact that she was a villain in Hawkeye, and there's that for me personally is just such an exciting place to be because there's so much gray area that you can go with that as a jumping off point. And I think in the conversations with Marvel, we talked about like places we could go, and their response to all of this was like, hey, let's lean into that. Let's push the envelope. Let's go down the rabbit hole and see how far we can go with her villainhood. And then you introduce a character like Kingpin into it, and it gave us such a great jumping off point for the series. Yeah, no, it's interesting because we didn't set out to do a TV MA show. Right, it sort of came about organically in the process, and as I mentioned, like in looking at where she's coming from and where she's going, it's interesting because on paper you have a character who is a deaf indigenous girl growing up in Oklahoma in the middle of the United States, ending up in New York and becoming a top-ranking lieutenant in Kingpin's army, who also has multiple what you would call disabilities. And so for myself, it was like asking the question, like, how does a character ascend to that level? And the answer is you don't get to get there without being particularly good at what you do. And so that meant that we had to lean into some of the more violent aspects of her profession. I have no idea. I think the TV MA logo showed up in front of one of our screenings at some point a couple months ago. But it was always just leaning into like some of the more, we had to be able to tell the story of the character, and I think as we were crafting things and leaning into some of the more violent aspects of it, it was always how does this serve the story? And so based off of that, we really tried to incorporate that where possible, and then it sort of naturally, organically became TVMA. In not trying to shy away from her indigenous heritage and the fact that she's deaf, we also not only did we not want to shy away from the fact that she's an amputee, but we wanted to embrace it. And so I think in looking at the specifics of her situation, we tried to incorporate it into the story wherever possible. Oh yeah, no, that's a great question. I think one of the things that we really tried to do was, like you just mentioned, I'm not deaf. I'm indigenous and I'm American, but I'm not deaf, and so we made sure that we had deaf writers in the writers' room, and that we had deaf consultants behind the scenes. We had an American Sign Language master who was translating our scripts from English to ASL because the two are not one-to-one. And we also, in addition to that, we also had multiple deaf actors in front of the camera. But there were so many great things that came from that. I'm even thinking one of the things that we learned in the writers' room is that deafness can be hereditary. And so our deaf writers were sharing with us that it would make sense for one of Maya Lopez's parents to be deaf. And for us, because the character of William, her father, had already been established in Hawkeye as somebody who was hearing, it made sense that the mother was also deaf. And so, again, in order to be sort of true and authentic to the story, we decided to go up and cast a actress who was both Native American and deaf. And we found an amazing woman named Katrina Zervogel to play her mother. But that was just one example of us just trying to be as authentic as possible, of that working out. Yeah, I think sort of the scene that you're referring to, I think it was always about trying to put ourselves in the audience, or trying to put the audience in the perspective of Maya Lopez wherever possible, right? And so in our research and in taking classes and so on and so forth, like we tried to find opportunities where we could place the audience in the perspective of Maya Lopez, so like, and again, like there's a fight scene in the first episode that I particularly loved on the page, and in this scene, Maya, without spoiling anything, I can say that Maya Lopez enters the scene as a teenage girl, but she leaves as a cold-blooded killer. And so for me, it was important for us to be able to experience that scene in real time. But then again, even to try to add another layer to that too, we wanted to be able to put the audience in her perspective, in her, in this case, her clean POV, and experience this scene as she was experiencing. So that's sort of like multiple levels of how we tried to incorporate that absence of sound and silence. Yeah, I think it all stemmed from authenticity, right? And trying to tell as true a story as possible. And for us, that meant engaging the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I think there's this sort of misconception about indigenous Americans that all Native Americans are the same, and it's just one big monolithic kind of group. And that couldn't be further from the case. There's over 600 tribes and cultures, each with their own unique traditions, their own languages, so on and so forth. And so for myself, it was about engaging the Choctaw Nation, which is, I'm indigenous, I'm American, but I'm Navajo. And those were very different from each other, with extremely different languages, cultures, and traditions. So for myself, it was important that we engage the Choctaw Nation and get people who were native Choctaw speakers, who understood the language and the cultures and the traditions, so that we could tell a more authentic story.
I was moving to such a small supporting role to now this #1 role on the call sheet, and it was just such a big step for me. And I prepared myself with an acting coach. I'm very thankful for that, which I had one of the nicest acting coaches, and they were deaf as well. So that was so nice to be able for them to accommodate and make that change for me. And so preparing with the acting, reading the scripts, and I'm just so grateful about how Marvel was able to support me. Just knowing I was that overwhelmed, and I felt that support from Marvel to become a supporting role to a lead was very, very nice. Man, that was tough. I learned, because I grew up with not having full access to American Sign Language, I used something called Signing Exact English, or C Sign Language, where you use every single word when signing. So ASL and C Sign Language is different. So the body language is different. The body language, it's important to understand all of that information. So I learned that having an ASL consultant on set as well, who was able to, correct and work with me in my grammar and in using sign language, that was nice, but it was also a challenge for me to have to rethink sign language. And so everything that I did was very tough, but being able to see and use the sign language and just apply it to my character, and using my acting coach, putting that all together, that was a challenge, but it was definitely very fun to be able to do that. As I mentioned earlier, I did have the acting coach that was able to help me with my emotions, because I did not grow up with the same amount of trauma that Maya did grow up with, but my acting coach was able to help me to kind of embody and develop those emotions while rehearsing the lines. So that was able to help me connect with the character more. So there's a lot of, kudos I can give to my acting coach, but that's how we just kind of developed from me to the character. And so I was able to portray me, but also I was able to see a little bit of myself through Maya as well. I would say she knows that she's not really a superhero, but she does have this trauma that she can feed off of. So, but I also did have some sort of trauma. I had a lot of surgeries growing up. I had my first one, I was 3, probably, and that ended when I was 12 for my leg. So we did have trauma, but different kinds of trauma. So I was able to connect with her with our different kinds of childhood trauma and also our family. So maybe I was able to connect with the trauma and our love for our families.
It's exciting. You know, I love playing this character, and Echo's turned out so great, and it's so much more of the tone that I like to play this character in. Yeah, I'm very excited about it. And Charlie and I are just starting back up on Daredevil Born Again, so that's also going to be in the same kind of tone, a bit, you know, gritty and emotionally and physically violent. And yeah, no, it's great. I love playing this character. It comes from the point of view of this relationship between Maya and him. Alekwa Cox plays Maya / Echo, and she's just so good. You know, it's a very emotional relationship. That relationship, it's almost the father and daughter relationship. There's a lot going on there, just between her wanting to go out on her own and him not wanting her to. And so a lot of fathers and daughters are going to understand that. But then you add this kind of Marvel iconic stuff to it, the good versus evil stuff. And so to put those two things together, that kind of father-daughter thing and the good versus evil stuff, it's a great way to help tell a story, you know. I've always felt that my character Kingpin operates really well, like to perform him in that kind of scenario where it's both grounded and still iconic, you know, in the Marvel way. I think is like the perfect stage for Fisk to exist on. So it's I think he works best in that circumstance. It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I'm using the word emotional a lot because a lot of it is based in that, you know, like when Alekwa and I were doing scenes together, they were mostly like very face-to-face, very intense stuff, you know. And so we're dealing with all of this real people stuff, you know, real human behavior, real human circumstances. And so like you would play any intense kind of complicated, complex characters trying to figure out life together, you know, and trying to exist together without and both, and in this case, Maya feeling like she can be independent of me. When Alekwa, the actress, and myself were doing these scenes, you know, just on a very human level, it's very dynamic, and the better the dialogue is written, and it was written great, the more intense, the more it means, the more specific you can be as an actor while the camera is rolling, you know. That's the way I see it, you know. That's the way I feel about it. When you ask me a question like that, the only answer I can give is how it felt in the moment when we were doing it, you know, speaking the author's words, reacting to each other. Yeah, it was quite intense and very kind of grounded in real human behavior, I thought. I think that it's there. If it's written well, then you just have to play the scene. You just have to play the emotion that you're approaching the scene from. And I think it ends up working in that way. This one is not easy to answer because there are so many aspects to making it, when we did it, how we performed it, and the feelings that I have after it. I mean, one will always be Alekwa herself, the actress. She's new. She doesn't have a lot of experience. This is a big opportunity for anybody to have a lead in a show and have to carry the whole show like she did. So, but not to mention her being new to it all, you know. So how impressive she was with her acting abilities and her abilities to pull off the kind of brutal strength that her character has physically and emotionally. She was just so super impressive. I can't tell you, amazing. So that thought comes to mind. And then the idea of getting the chance to put this character, this Marvel character that I've recreated for them, to put it in all these different circumstances is exciting. It's a challenge as an actor, and it's when we get it right, it's really fun, and I really like it. So there's many different things I feel are the answer to your question.